At the age of 16, my coaching journey began, and I was an athlete, I was a wakeboarder. And I remember going out onto the water, going out with friends, going out with my brother, and I had this ability to see the tricks. You know, I could watch a video and I could see how the person could do a trick. And some of these tricks I couldn't do personally, but I could see how just to be able to break it down. And what I'd do is I'd break these tricks down and then I'd teach other people how to do it. And my brother would ask me, how do I do this trick? I'd watch it on a video, I'd look at it in a magazine, and I'd break it down to 5 or 7 simple steps. And I'd be able to coach somebody else how to do a trick that I couldn't. Now, some of the people that I taught went on to be Australian champions, state champions, and even world champions. And they couldn't work out how to do the trick, but I was able to show them how to do it in just simple steps. And a couple of years after I'd learned to do this, I was interviewed by a magazine called the Water Skiers News. And it was an interview with myself and my brother. And they had to ask us certain questions. And they asked my brother, what's one of Daniel's skills? And he said, he's got the skill of a coach. So my coaching journey began at age 16. And then some other people had seen my coaching ability. And I remember at the age of 16, I was getting paid a couple of $100 an hour to coach water sports. And it was big money back in 1996. I didn't have my license yet, but I was making a couple of $100 for coaching lessons. So I kept coaching wakeboarding, I kept coaching other people. I learned about self-development in the late 90s, and then I'd moved over to the UK. And I went to the UK and I was coaching wakeboarding again in the United Kingdom. I went on over to America and I was coaching wakeboarding in America, and then I'd come back to Australia. After I was in Australia a couple of years, I wanted to travel again and I went to Dubai. And eventually I found a guy, he was a mentalist, and his name was Larry Soffer. And we're on this aircraft, and my fiance at the time, Nini, she's my wife now, we started talking to this mentalist. And he started to be able to change the way we thought by asking these directionalized questions. And I was really interested, and I said, you know, what have you learned? And he said, I've learned Dianetics. He'd studied Scientology, he'd studied this stuff called NLP, and he even went to a magician school in South Africa. And I was fascinated about what he'd learned. So I started to study the mind, and I went and studied Dianetics. I didn't want to study Scientology, but I loved Dianetics. But to become a Dianeticist, you had to become a Scientologist, and I didn't want to do that. But I loved the thought of being able to help people, because I was looking for a solution to my own mental and emotional blocks that I'd carried for years. So I'd met him, that started my journey. I met another guy named Christoph Spiceness, and he was from the UK. And I was on a flight to the UK, I was cabin crew, I was pushing down my meal cart through the aircraft, and he stopped me and he said, Daniel, wow, you've got this big aura around you. Now, I didn't understand what that meant, so I said to him, I said, sir, maybe you need another drink. And he said, no, it's your aura. And I said, sir, I really think you need another drink. And he said, no, Daniel, he goes, it's your energy. You've got this great energy. And I thought, wow, that sounds fascinating. And, you know, between meal services on the aircraft, you get a lot of time to talk to your customers. So I ended up talking to him, lovely guy. He was an author of a book. He was traveling with his family. And he said to me that he was a life coach. Now, that was the second connection. And I thought, this is fascinating. You know, I'd studied this guy named Brian Tracy, Zig Ziglar, and all these people back in 98, 99, 2000 during my real estate career, but I hadn't had a coach. I'd had a mentor, but I hadn't had a coach. And Christoph started to tell me about these breakthrough moments that you could have, this ability to change the way you feel about yourself, the thoughts that run through your mind, and he invited me for a coaching session. So what I did, I changed my flight schedules and I flew back to the UK. I got to the UK, I met him at a hotel, and we had a coaching session in a hotel lobby. And he asked me these questions, and for the first time, I started to get connected with my emotions, and a lot of these emotions started to come up, and as they come up, a lot of these tears started to come out. And I had this level of self-awareness of why I thought and felt the way that I did. And it was this addictive feeling that as I talked through these challenges and I talked about the goals that I wanted to achieve, that I felt that I could actually get there. So I said to him, look, what happens next? He said, well, we could continue this. So I started to change my flight schedules and fly back to the UK to work with my life coach. And then after a while, I had these big breakthroughs. And then I asked him, where did you study? So he said, I studied in Boulder, Colorado with a company called Coach Training Alliance. So I went and did the exact same course. And then I started to learn about the law of attraction. Now, when I signed up for the program, I didn't have the money. There was no way that my schedule and my roster would align with this, the training schedule from Coach Training Alliance. And I knew that every training I'd have to do would be every week on a Friday at 4 a.m. But I really wanted to do this course. So I signed up for it, and I had to figure a way how I'd make it work. And I started to use the law of attraction. I started to focus single-mindedly on what I want. And the first week of the course, I didn't have a roster. The next week of the course, my aircraft had landed and I'd got back to the hotel just in time to have my coaching session. And this happened, and all I thought about was coaching. All I thought about was going to these sessions every Friday. And for an entire 6 months, there was about 20 sessions, and I only ever missed one session. And I didn't have to change my roster, but I knew everything was just aligning. And I completed the course, and I started to work with people. And it was a great course, but I felt that there wasn't enough meat on the bone. I didn't feel that I could actually create transformational changes. I just felt that I was talking to people. So what I knew was I needed something that had process. So I started to learn, and I was in Singapore one day at Brass Busser Complex, and I went to a second-hand bookshop, and I saw this book on the shelf written by a gentleman by the name of Dr. Edward de Bono. And it was like a little red flag, and I thought, I know this name. And I opened up the book, and I said, I'm familiar with this material. I've learned this material before, but I was trying to figure out where I'd learned it from. And it reminded me that when I was younger, I had a series of learning difficulties. I had many learning difficulties. I had physiological problems, and that I had been introduced to Dr. Edward de Bono's court thinking system. And I read the book, and I said, this makes sense. This is about thinking differently, and coaching was about thinking differently. So I picked up the book, I bought it, I went back to my hotel, I finished it, I came back and I went through all of the shelves, and I bought another 25 books by Dr. Edward de Bono, and I read them all. I took them back to Dubai, and then I kept swapping my flights, and I swapped all of my flights to go back to Singapore specifically. And by going back to this bookshop month after month, I'd eventually found all 70 odd books that Dr. Edward de Bono had written, and I read every single one of them. And I knew that those same principles were coaching principles, and that I could share these with other people and they could think differently. So I started to incorporate what I'd learned in life coaching, Dianetics, and from Edward de Bono's effective thinking. But I knew I had to learn more, so I went and started to study under Dr. Edward de Bono. And I did a course called Effective Thinking for Entrepreneurs. And once again, it blew my mind that if you started to ask the right questions, people could think differently, and you could actually learn to think. And I started to retrain my brain, and it was for the first time in my life that I actually felt that I could learn. So I'd learned to learn at the age of 29, and it became addictive. And then I found another course, and I did a life coaching course at Warnborough College in the United Kingdom. And it was a great course, but there was no tools, and I just felt that I was talking to people again, and I didn't feel that I was really making the transformational changes. So I knew there was something else. And then I started in peer support with Emirates Airline. And in peer support, I started to learn new techniques that enabled me to ask the right questions in the right order and sequence, and people were starting to break through their mental blocks. So I got heavily involved in peer support. My phone would ring, I'd get activated on the peer support network, and by working with these people and working through the right questions in the right order and sequence, what I quickly found was that people who would have had post-traumatic stress disorder rapidly returned to work, and my success rate was 99%. I remember the only person who didn't go back to work after an intervention with me was a gentleman who he was cabin crew, and a customer had a heart attack just before she left the aircraft, and unfortunately she died on the aircraft. He was okay with the event. The only reason why he didn't go back was he was fatigued and he'd been awake for about 36 hours. And then I realised that coaching worked. And my contact inside of Emirates Airline encouraged me to start to join into the Critical Incident Stress Management Program. And then I learned more about NLP, and we would be activated on critical incidents that happened with the airline. And then I was activated on more peer support challenges with the cabin crew and the flight deck. And I started to work with hundreds of people. And by the time I left Emirates Airline, I'd worked with more than 500 different people. As a leader of 17,000 cabin crew, I'd have multiple coaching sessions. And that was how the coaching journey began. And then I learned about NLP, and I'd heard about Dr. Richard Bandler, Dr. Tad James, Christopher Howard, Tony Robbins. And I started to study their work. And I remember by the time I'd left Dubai, I'd gone through more than 1,000 books, programs and videos on coaching. And I was really hooked. And from 2008 through to today, almost 11 years after I started that coaching journey, I'm here. And I've studied under the world's greatest trainers. My personal coach, Brian Tracy. He's trained more than 5 million business people around the world. I've gone on to become one of the top 1% of business coaches globally, and I've worked with more than 3,500 people around the world. And today that I'm now in the UK, every day is exciting because every day I'm helping somebody. And one of my goals in life was to be a doctor. And as I looked at medicine, I looked at it and I thought, I can help them heal the body, but something within me told me that they needed to heal their mind first of all. And I was more inclined to help people through psychology. And that's how my coaching journey has evolved over the years.